Live here.
Live!
But we don't have to necessarily know what that means.
What's the someday of Black?
I don't
there's
know
a
that we
reason
want to-
this story happens now.
Ladies and gentlemen, the movie writes itself. Ooh. Well,
I'm still streaming. How do I stop streaming? No!
Hi.
Yo, that's my gangster face.
Hello, everybody. It's Friday, February 24th, and this is Ben and Jake Write a Movie, but it's kind of
But
an
here's the thing.
interlude
Here's the
session.
thing. We're not writing a movie today, are we? No.
Well, we are writing two movies, just none on our live
it's
podcast.
not on our podcast.
Yeah.
So for those of you who missed the last episode, we were like, we've got loads we're trying to do. How are we going to do that? And basically it was, well, we're going to have to put one thing down. And this is what you have to do sometimes when you're spinning plates.
Yes.
We have
Always
to-
juggling. Always juggling.
Yeah.
And so we thought, hey, you know what? We don't want to lose you guys.
I just
So-
want to lose you.
we figured we'd check in, and actually it's really interesting to think about the process, because that's what this podcast is all about, of what we're up to and how we're juggling these things and kind of the ups and downs of that. Before we get into that, I just wanted to touch base on what's happening in the screenwriting world right now.
What is happening in the screenwriting world?
What is happening? Well, we've talked about it in the past. Actually, we talked a little bit about it in our Charlie interview. If you haven't watched that episode, go back and watch the Parlipanades brothers. But yeah, the Writers Guild is starting their negotiations of our minimum basic agreement, which is our contract with the buyers,
also known as the MBA.
Yes, the MBA.
Yeah.
And we have we have started to do union meetings, which is always the process. This will be our third negotiation that we've been guild members for.
Right.
Our fourth big kind of guild movement, because we did have our agency initiative that we had these similar types of meetings. And I went to one of the meetings last night, and while I'm not going to give any details in terms of the specifics of what the guild is talking about, because it's important that we don't get into that stuff in public when they have a lot of work to do. I will say that it was a huge meeting. It was actually the biggest one I've been to in all the time that I've been in the guild. It was a great turnout. And I think the guild is very much in, not unison, that's the wrong word, but we're very united.
Unified, yes, totally.
Yeah, unified, yes.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because there was our MBA was up, our contract was up for negotiation in 2020. And of course that was the year that COVID happened.
Right.
That was the year where for a period of time everything kind of stopped. There was a buying freeze for a minute while everyone just kind of went, what's going on?
Everything shut down for a moment.
Everything
there was
kind
no
of
productions. None.
No productions.
Yeah.
Absolutely right. So the several of the things that we are wanting to negotiate for this time were still stuff that we wanted to negotiate for last time, but the guild knew that it wouldn't have membership support.
Well,
potentially
we also didn't have the leverage.
Exactly right.
If they're not, if the companies aren't making things because of a pandemic, then they really don't care what you say about what you want to get paid when they're once again making things maybe one day.
Yeah.
The sky was falling at that moment.
It was.
And our contract expires May 1st. And so literally negotiations were happening at the peak of the initial wave of the pandemic. So it was a horrible time to have negotiations. I think the guild did the best they could with what they had. We did get a couple of really great things the last time, one of which I just actually got to benefit from. We now have paid family leave through the guilds.
Is it paternity leave specifically?
Paternity leave and any family leave. I think it's specific to a partner or the person. I think if I'm sure you get the same benefits if you had the baby yourself. In my case, my wife, it's just for the member. So my wife doesn't qualify for that paid leave, even though she's on the insurance policy. It's interesting the way it's done. It was negotiated as a benefit through the guild, but it is through the health plan.
Right.
So it's actually, but hey, we didn't have that before, and now I actually got to have paternity leave that was paid for by the employers when they make contributions to our health and pension plan. So that was great.
Great, really great. So that's it, isn't it? That's benefit of negotiations in action.
Yeah,
like you saw actual dollars in your account because of that.
This is a big one.
This is a big one.
And we've talked a little bit about what's at stake, and I think people out there, if you read any trades at all, if you're in touch with any Hollywood news, you know that the streaming business has grown over the last, a lot over the last 3 years, a lot over the last 3 years, but really over the last like 6 to 8 years, it's really been growing. But man, the pandemic years just went. And so even though, the companies tend to cry poverty because the stock prices go down, the reality is they spend an enormous amount of money.
Yeah, their spend is going up, and writers' salaries are going down.
Going down, yes, and that is really the crux of what having a union is all about. Us standing together to go, hey, this isn't fair. This isn't right, and it needs to be fixed. And so, it's going to be interesting. I think there will be a public, at some point, the guild puts out a public pattern of demands, I believe. I think they posted it on the website last time around or something.
I think they did, yeah.
Which basically is just like what the guild is asking for. They started to tell us a little bit about that last night. People were very supportive. And so that will ultimately be public. They do this first round of meetings to get guilds, but
again, like they've gotten to this place now, not just because they've done outreach to us via WGA survey.
There were 7,000 responses to the survey.
So the Writers Guild regularly sends surveys out to its members asking all kinds of questions. I always fill it out. Matthew Sand, our wonderful mentor who we had on here. Matthew.
Hi, Matthew.
They get to this place because they ask the membership a bunch of questions like, hey, what's going on with you? Like, have you experienced this? Like, what are the specific things that you are struggling with? One of the things we had mentioned, a question was asked last night by my wonderful partner, Benjamin Lustig, about there is this thing when you're in a partnership. When you are in a partnership, you have caps on the amount of money that you can, that your pension and health can be contributed on. And it's
per project. Yeah.
And those are different.
And it gets very, very complicated. But basically, in order to qualify for health insurance as a writer, you have to earn a certain amount of money per year. Because there are caps per project, when you are a screenwriter, sometimes you're working on the same project for multiple years. And as partners, our caps are divided between the two of us. So we actually have a lower threshold to where that project ends up capping out. And so if we're working on the same movie for a couple of years, we could end up not qualifying for health insurance. And it's an issue. It's probably not based on my feelings of last week. I don't know that they'll take my question and actually make that an issue with this negotiation, but maybe they will.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was, we wrote about those things in our surveys.
Yes. And Matthew, our wonderful mentor, said, ooh, strike talk. I do want to be clear. I'm not saying there's going to be a strike. They did not say last night there is going to be a strike.
No.
I think what is clear, what the industry knows, what we know, is that these negotiations are very important. They're very important for writers. They're very important for the future of how the business of making movies and TV is done. And it's changed a lot over even just the time that Jake and I have been working in it. And we know people like Matthew who've been working in it for a lot longer, and it's changed even more since they started. And it is broken in many ways. And our hope is that the companies also acknowledge that things have changed and that there are things that need to change again.
I liked one of the things you said. I don't think this is like exposing something. There was this absolute thing of kind of going, for the longest time, writers were employed under industry norms.
Norms, yes.
And that these were, it's normal to have a room that consists of X many writers that runs for X many weeks. And that's given, and that's the norm. But because it wasn't a rule, the companies were going, well, what if we had a mini room? What if we ran a mini room for, say, 5 weeks and say you've got to write an entire series of a show in 5 weeks and you've got 6 months to do it? And that wasn't the norm, but they go, well, let's just try that. And they overwork everyone and it's crazy. And then all of a sudden it's like, then that has become the norm.
Right.
Overworked people, underpaid, they're being...
Well, yeah, and I think that's the point of these negotiations is to go, we don't like potentially what the norms are becoming.
Yes.
And we're going to have to try our best to negotiate so that those norms that we're not happy with don't stay, and we can develop potentially new rules to change those things. And it's incredibly complicated. I will definitely keep everybody posted as I continue to go to the meetings. And of course, like I said before, I can't share details of what they are saying.
And there is, to be clear on anyone who doesn't understand this, perhaps you're a new emerging screenwriter, the reason that you keep your cards close to your chest is because you are entering a negotiation. You don't want the person who you are negotiating with to go, I know they're going to cave on this. I know that that's not really important to them. So, but just want to pick up on something you said earlier on as well, again, for people who may not know what the trades are and where they can find information out about this kind of stuff. There are probably 3 main industry websites that people get a lot there. I would say that Deadline is probably
one of the top, for sure.
One of the top, Hollywood Reporter and Variety. Where you're going to be able to find out all the kind of stuff in that. But again, what's interesting in those places is, that the trades are they sell advertising. And who do they sell advertising to? The studios. So in those trades, there's a
little conflict of interest.
There's a little conflict of interest because they are going to be leaning more into the story of the studios going, we haven't got any. And I've seen that multiple times. With like industry journalists, so I'll be like, I used to quite respect you. Suddenly reading a thing that was so anti-writer going, man, this guy.
I think, look, the trades are a good place to get some information. They're not a good place to necessarily believe exactly what's going on. If the trades are saying it's going to be a strike, well, they don't actually know that, and nobody knows that right now.
Nobody knows that.
And I think that it's important to understand if you want to be a screenwriter or if you are a screenwriter that and this is not like sharing anything new, but that the way in which it works right now as a screenwriter is that there are minimums in our minimum basic agreement that are set out that are what's called scale. Those minimums in every negotiation, we try and bump those minimums up.
Again, just talking in layman's terms for a second, those minimums mean the minimum amount of money you must be paid. It's almost like what's the minimum wage? But again, for certain services, what's the minimum wage
for all different services?
All different services, for an outline, for a treatment, for a story document, for a first draft, second draft, rewrite, polish, whatever it is. There's all those different things, and they all have numbers associated with them, and it's all been worked out.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that will, undoubtedly, because it is in every negotiation, we always try and get our minimums higher.
Yeah.
And then, I think that nobody is under the impression that streaming is not going to be a big part of this negotiation. Because in the 3 years that we have not been negotiating, what's happened? Every company has a streamer. And currently, except for Sony. But Sony sells a lot to streamers. And actually, the way in which, and I just found this out because of The Princess, that 20th Century Fox, 20th Century Studios now, who made The Princess, and we love them for making The Princess, in our contract said that The Princess was intended to be used as a new media movie, or I can't even remember the words. It was like intended for new media purposes. Because that was in our contract, even though 20th specific doesn't have a 20th century streamer, they then put that content on Hulu, which they don't 100% own. Disney owns 3/4 of Hulu, but they're all, separate companies. But we get paid as if it is a new media. We get paid under the new media aspect of the contract when it comes to residuals. Residuals for writers are a form of payment that we count on, especially as screenwriters who may not, our jobs are very sporadic. We never know what's going to happen. We now, having a movie made, we're like, oh yes, finally we're going to get residuals. The reality is, and I don't mind saying this, under the current contract, under the current minimum basic agreement, The Princess, a full feature that in any other time period, based on its budget, which is not my business to say, but was big enough to be considered a theatrical release movie. In any other time period in movie history, that would have been released in the theaters. But because we exist now in the streaming world, it was made with the intention to be a streamer. So the way it works is that they pay you a single figure for an entire year of use.
Well,
it does not matter.
To be clear, $1.
No, it's not a lot. It's actually very little. And I could spend the time to go through the calculations, but let's just say, like, by the time Jake and I have to split it 50-50, it ain't going to do much. And while it's extra, technically, I mean, it is a benefit that we get because we've already been paid for the movie. In times past, when a movie was made for theatrical release and then had subsequent releases, whether it was home video, whether it was basic cable, whether it was anything else, you made residuals that were substantial. They actually, you could live off of them. And famously, Jon Favreau talks about how his residuals on Elf paid for his mansion. Not the movie, the residuals.
So, I really liked what Charlie Polipinades said when he was on the show a few weeks ago, which was that supports the creative community during lean times. You go, Jon Favreau, oh, good for you. You bought a mansion with, that's one example of it. But the other example is, the TV writer who hasn't booked a job that year because X, Y, and Z reasons, and can afford to not go out and stop writing a new pilot because they can afford to do that because they have to go and get a job, another regular job, because they're being supported by their residual income. Same goes for actors, same goes for any creative people. Like, residuals support the creative community, which is what, if the studios are wise, they are going to realize that. They are going to go, you need residual payments.
Less about wisdom and more about the bottom line now. It truly is.
It is.
There is no more, the days of studios fostering creativity feel like they are in the past.
Well,
and now
they're
it's about
to shareholders. That's what they care about.
Well, yeah, they have to. I mean, look, I don't blame like a lot of the people that work at the studios. They're great people.
Absolutely right.
And they want to make the best content that they can, of course.
Yeah, of course they do.
But they have to be beholden to shareholders because that's what's happened. Companies have merged. There have been takeovers. There have been public offerings. There are all kinds of things that have happened.
Netflix is a tech company. It's not an entertainment company.
Right. I guess it's interesting. I wonder what it would be argued as today. It definitely started as a tech company. I wonder now it's a full studio. It's a full blown. Netflix actually makes more content than any other studio.
Interesting.
They're the number one producer of content.
They are, just beholden to shareholders.
Yes.
And like they make decisions based on what shareholders are doing. Anyway, it's a whole
thing. And here's the thing: if anyone's interested in learning more about what new media means to a writer, what the current minimum basic agreement says about new media, and what people who write new media movies get paid, well, you can actually Google WGA minimum basic agreements.
And then you can also then, if you want to, go, how much does it cost to live in Los Angeles, where a bunch of TV writers have to be?
Right.
Then you kind of go,
but those figures are already worked out, and this is what's crazy, and this is why I think, as a screenwriter, but also as a TV writer, this contract negotiation is so important.
Yeah.
The numbers that you will see if you do Google minimum basic agreement and you go and you look at the residual payments for new media. There's even a help guide that you can go to that isn't even having to go through the actual MBA. It's all online. It's all available. What you'll notice is that the numbers are fixed based on the size of the streamer, not based on the success of the property.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's just crazy. And look, maybe The Princess has had less views than some other movies, and maybe that'll end up benefiting us. We don't get the information as to how, these companies keep this information very close to their chest. I have no idea how many people have watched The Princess.
Yeah.
But in the past, if something, when it wasn't an on-demand kind of a format where you got paid for reruns, you got paid because it went to DVD, you got paid because people bought it as a rental on demand, you were being rewarded for the success of the product that you created. Now it's just this really cheap flat fee that doesn't really cover anything. And what's really nuts is that some companies are actually taking stuff off the air to try and avoid paying.
You've seen it. I think probably the most kind of famous one in the press lately has been all about HBO Max. That has been taking content off of its service to be able to go, well, we can have that as a tax write-down. Batwoman, very famously, they went, let's just can that.
Right.
I
will say there was something said last night about the taking content off, and it had to do with, I guess, a lot of the stuff that we're seeing taken off things, and it's getting a lot of press. And, oh my gosh, they took Westworld off.
It's going elsewhere.
It's being licensed elsewhere, and so those writers will get residuals from that other. From that.
But Westworld, for example, is now on Tubi, I believe.
I think it's on Tubi and Roku, actually.
Well, there you go.
But it's a very complicated thing that we just hope that those that we've elected to be our representatives in the guild fully fight for, and they will. And as screenwriters, and I'll say this also because this podcast is primarily about movie writing, even though we do quite a bit of television as well. Mostly we are known as screenwriters. We're a minority in the guild, like an extreme minority. I think they said like 7 out of 10 guild members work in episodic television. 7 out of 10. So when we have these negotiations,
quick conversion, that's 70%.
Yes. So. Yes, but anyway, the way it was stated was 7 out of 10. So the quote. So the point being, though, is that screenwriters' needs, and there's lots of them, and we could spend an entire hour going over our gripes about what screenwriters need. tend to be left out a lot. And that's a big frustration within the screenwriter community. So if you're looking to become a screenwriter, or you're a new screenwriter, or maybe you've just joined the guild recently and you're going to experience this for the first time, I hope this time is different. I really, really do. But the guild and the way that it works really does work for the majority of the membership, because they need the majority of the membership to be united in order to have leverage. And so while the screenwriters and the all the other different facets of writers, whether it's variety shows or game shows or whatever, while we may make up 30% collectively, we are not the majority. And so our needs, while important, and I do believe that they care, when it comes to negotiations and the studios are playing hardball and they're playing hardball and everybody's trying to think, and it's between, you know, a screenwriter need and a strike, usually the screenwriter need goes out the window to avoid the strike. I don't know what'll happen this time. I hope, you know, there was a lot of really wonderful sentiment where writers were being very supportive of all writers and that we are all in this together.
Totally.
I hope that actually comes through this time. I really, really do. So now
we are segueing. A couple of comments really quickly. Noah Tucker says, hello. Hello back.
Hello.
Brooke Thornton says, congrats on Joey's nomination. So Joey King,
the
Princess, was nominated a couple of days ago for the Critics' Choice Super Award, which is a series of awards that kind of generally tend to award more kind of like blockbustery, more popular movies. And she
action genre, sci-fi, fantasy, and horror tend to be
she got nominated for Best Actress in an Action Movie for her role in The Princess.
Woo!
She actually twice in this category because she was also nominated for her role in Bullet Train as well. So she's got 2 nominations for Best Actress in an Action Movie. So congrats, Joey.
Joey.
It's wonderful, and you were great in The Princess. So.
You were great in The Princess. You absolutely deserve it. I will say, watching Joey do her action scenes on set was a privilege.
It was so great. I mean, I just remember being wonderful. There. Like, on that second one, like the 3rd or 4th day we were there, and it was the courtyard scene, and just watching her just show up and just like be there for it, committed. We were talking to Clayton Barber, who was the 2nd unit director and kind of one of the people in charge of the choreography for all the action. And he was just like, she's maybe one of the best people I've ever had the opportunity to work with. She like shows up, she does the work. And that's it, isn't it? You just go, good for you. Like she didn't, you know, she had a stunt double, obviously, but most of the time, totally. Most of the time you're seeing it, it's her, and she did so great. So
she did so great,
and
there were these really talented guys that wrote those fight scenes. So you know, it's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that she's nominated for an action
it was excellent.
movie.
Excellent. We got a comment right now from Thomas Lee. Hey, Thomas, thanks for tuning in again. We always appreciate your comments for the show. So he says, for screenwriters, is there going to be something done to address the home run model of making a living, i.e. packaging takes forever? Getting paid to write is an anomaly.
No.
No,
I don't think so.
I don't think so.
There is actually, I think, a lot that is trying to be done to help lower level writers and middle class writers in the screenwriting area. But, you know, the movie business is such a challenging part of our industry. There's less movies being made. There's fewer writers who are on people's lists. Yeah. And when they do get hired, they make good money. But then even at the lower levels, you have people making scale. I think that the anomaly of what is now required from us, which is basically, and we've talked a little bit about this, we as screenwriters now, in order to compete in this business, we have to also put together these packages, and we and our teams and our reps have to put other elements on it. It's not just about writing anymore. It's now about basically producing. It's why we ended up with a co-producer credit on The Princess.
Yeah.
because we had to go out there and find other producing partners. We had to go and get Joey King to come on to The Princess before we ever took it to market. And the companies want this. I don't think they're going to stop wanting it. It would be great if they were open to doing more development. We'll see. I know there are changes in terms of the desire for more quality over quantity. That can go both ways. That could mean less jobs for writers. So I don't know. I don't know what the answer to it is.
The answer is either.
We wish we did. We're living in the same crazy ass world.
Yeah.
We
and,
do.
I think kind of like leading up to this, like the previous, I'd say pre-2020, still difficult.
Oh, yeah.
Still difficult, but I think we're in an extreme difficulty thing at the moment. Like you, I hope that studios are okay doing a bit more development, so that they're a bit more willing to kind of take chances. I feel like at the moment their risk tolerance is tiny. It's tiny. It was a little more. We've written a bunch of movies that haven't been made.
Yes.
We've written a bunch of TV shows that haven't been made and that will probably never get made.
Yeah.
These companies spent money buying things. They developed them for a little while. I was like, not quite what we want to make right now, but
And look, there was a lot of waste going on back then. So I don't blame, the people in charge for going, hey, we're buying all this shit and then we're never making it.
Yeah.
But if you look at the most successful movies out there, the ones that are really making a lot of money for the companies, most of them, even if they're not credited, most of them have gone through a period of development with multiple writers and multiple drafts of the scripts.
Yeah, absolutely.
The writers have worked with the directors, they have worked with the actors, they have done their time. And so the idea that somehow all of that work would be done for free beforehand and that you would get the same quality of product afterwards feels a little backwards. And you would go, look, like you'll just look at the number of people that worked on Avatar. Or, and all the credit.
Well, again, like we talked in one episode about Top Gun Maverick. I know of at least 2 writers who worked on that movie that do not have credit. And these are big writers. These are not small writers. These are people who were paid probably $1 million for a draft of that movie.
And so you
don't have credit.
Well, but here's what's interesting about that, I think credit aside, is the fact that clearly the companies know that development makes a better product. I don't agree with hiring that many writers on a project. I wish they would develop with one writer. They get scared and move on to the next very quickly sometimes. But I will say that they're willing on those big titles to spend the money for development. They're willing on their big IPs to go, hey, let's do an entire room to break the next Transformers thing, because we're willing to spend that money to make sure that we do it right. And yet on the speculative side, they don't want to pay any of that money. On the speculative side, for us middle class guys who aren't getting the Transformers gigs, we then have to come in with all the stuff.
Yeah, of course.
And you go, but wait a minute. You know you're going to make more money when you do that. So why don't you want to do it? It's not logical.
Thomas Lee again has another question. He says, if you can answer, for the script you're writing now, do you go to producers first or directors first? With us, we go to producers first. Because producers,
always,
no directors.
Yeah,
That's why you want that. They are going to produce it.
At this point, 90% of the time it's producers. We have one project that we're developing with a director. And we have one project that we've went out to an actor first. Those are always based on relationships. You're not going to go to a director without a producer if you don't have a relationship with that person already.
Absolutely.
We have a couple of questions also that were asked by another newer subscriber. I'll try and pronounce their username, Avifor. Avifor asked, have you ever started a movie from theme and figured out the concept from there?
That's a really interesting question. Have we ever done that?
No.
I'm interested in this theme. I want to do a movie about blank. Yeah, I don't think we tend to do that. I think it tends to be conceptual first, and then through the exploring of that concept, we kind of realize what the theme is.
We've started from character.
Yeah,
We've
sure.
started ideas based on, a singular character, and then found our way into the broader concept.
Yes, totally.
We started with even like with kind of a, I won't say gimmick, but it kind of is a gimmick. We've started ideas going, well, what if it was this meets this, and not knowing what the heck it was.
Absolutely.
But theme usually, I think for us, theme comes out of the process of going, oh, this is what we're trying to say through this.
Exactly. And it's funny because I kind of feel, from the kind of artistic side of what it is that we do, and yes, while there is absolutely a commerce side attached, but there is like, I feel like we bring things that are personal to us, to our work.
Yeah.
And so suddenly you'll be like, why am I interested in telling this story? What is it about now and me and you that wants this story to be told now? And occasionally I'll go like, oh, it's about this.
Right. Interesting.
And
we also tend to play in the same themes without even realizing it.
Absolutely right. 100%. You'd be like, oh, it's the same thing. You'd be like, oh, that's interesting. What is it in my unconscious mind that is wanting to express itself through story? I absolutely believe that one's mind is this expression for one's soul in one sense,
Right.
So we I think generally have that experience of going, well, what is this really about? Oh, I'm thinking it's about this, so that's not to say that one couldn't say, I really want to explore the theme of whatever, and again, theme has, theme means different things to different people. I always in our early screenwriting days really liked John Truby, 21, I forget the name of his book anyway, but he talks about that theme is should be the writer's view of the correct way to behave in the world. I'm not sure I 100%
behave. Interesting. That's an interesting kind
behave, be, maybe it's be world, okay, so whatever that is. I'm not sure. We have had moments in projects where we go, oh, it's the theme is that you only succeed if you are a good and decent person, whatever, whereas other times I feel like it's been more broad. We want to explore perhaps multiple themes of this and this and this.
Yeah, I think theme, though, it isn't kind of a weird topic. People will ask you about theme and you just kind of go, well,
what's the theme? What's the theme of this movie?
But I do think that if one of our stories is written well, which we attempt to do every time, that as the theme kind of appears, it does come out of our own personal life experience. And the way I look at theme is it's an expression of the way we see the world.
Sure.
And so our opinions is basically where the theme comes from. Our opinions on good versus evil, our opinions on selfish and selflessness, our opinions on the way people should treat each other, or the way women were treated in society back in medieval times. That thematic idea comes from our view on those experiences. And so that's how it's expressed. And then you can kind of extrapolate, well, what is the theme? Well, the theme is blank, but it's really about how you're expressing your story.
It would be interesting because, again, there are, in terms of theme, many different ways of expressing a theme through a movie. Exploring themes of female empowerment in a patriarchal society could be told modern day, could be told in in
They have,
a
yeah.
fairy tale castle, could be told on an oil rig, could be told in the offices of Fox News, could be told in many, many, many different ways. So it almost feels like that's kind of coming to it for me the wrong way round, coming from this really broad place of
Right.
theme, you know, and then and again, theme's really subjective. You know, a very funny video that was talking about the theme of Paul Blart Mall Cop and how you come to him from a really heady place and go, oh, it's about, you know, American society in a post 9/11 world, da 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 da. And some people can just go, no, it's about a really funny mall cop. Like, what does that mean? Like, I feel like that's an interpretive thing for the viewer. Two people can watch the same movie and think the theme is totally different. You know, it's a really personal, interpretive thing, you know. And while we, as you're saying, we do always try and think about theme in a certain way, we're not going to impose our idea of what the theme is on it. You know, we'll have thoughts of it and go, well, how can we play with the theme there? Someone else might get something completely different based on their own life experiences.
Yeah, I mean, when we write a pitch or when we come up with an idea, we actually do talk about theme, but we've actually moved, I think, away from basically saying the theme is blank, and going into more, this is a way to express the thematic idea of blank.
Totally. And it
so
might
our
not
character is facing a dilemma, and it dives into the thematic idea of the show because X, Y, and Z.
Totally.
Jacob writes for him working in television. The theme always comes back to the why now of the project, which is mostly mandatory for selling original TV IP. Absolutely. Yes, and also when we tend to do a pitch, we don't. The why now is very important, and sometimes we'll separate that out, and sometimes it won't really be the theme or the main, or even the main theme, because the why now could be a lot of different.
Let's just clarify what we mean by the why now. So one of the questions that one may get asked when pitching a television project in Hollywood today is, why this show? Why now? Well, I really want to, through the telling of this show, want to explore the extremes of political divide in modern day America, and how both sides think that they're right at the expense of their own humanity and the humanity of people they perceive to be on the other side. And they go, oh, okay, that sounds very interesting, because you're right, that is why, you know. So, you know, sometimes following Jacob, like we do like we find a current thing and we talk about that, you know. When we were pitching Final Fantasy, it was during the height of Trump, and it absolutely became part of the stuff that we were exploring through.
But there was very much, I mean, in like Final Fantasy is a really interesting aspect, because we had an entire thematic through line of Final Fantasy that was about racism.
Right.
It was a huge thematic idea within the show. It had nothing to do with the why now of the show, but it was very much a part of the story that we were telling, you know. So I feel like themes also, like, it's not just, they're not singular.
No.
I think you can express thematic ideas through an individual storyline, an individual character. A broad concept can be thematic. You know, there's you know, you could be telling a story with, what was it, Up in the Air, that was trying to tell a story about climate change through the, you know, this idea of an asteroid falling to Earth.
That wasn't Look Up.
Not Up in the Air. Don't Look Up. That's right. Up in the Air was George Clooney. This the Leo DiCaprio one, where
absolutely right.
So the thematic idea that they were working with was this desire to look away and ignore the truth of climate change that is
and yet
in front of us.
It's not about climate change at all.
Exactly.
You know.
And so that's what's interesting about, like, doing it from that direction. It's an interesting topic. I think that.
But again, one could say, while one person might take that, you could say it's about truth and the media.
Yeah. But it might be both.
Yeah. absolutely
And
right.
I think it is
Yeah.
usually. It's very rare that I go, oh no, that entire movie or that entire TV show only has one thematic idea.
Mm-hmm.
I go,
yeah.
I mean, if it does, it's probably pretty boring, actually.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Another question to go into would be, I don't know if you mentioned this on the streams. This is from one of our viewers, Int Pro. Don't know if you've already mentioned this on the streams, but do you like or use any particular writing software or combo, or is the best approach just a pile of 3x5s and 2 barrels of coffee? Thanks, and love your content. Thank you, Int Pro. And yes, we do.
We do. So we use a program called Fade In.
Mm-hmm.
It's a screenwriting piece of software. I think it probably costs between $50 and $60. One of the reasons I like Fade In is they give you free updates for life.
Yeah, I don't even remember how much it cost me when I first bought it.
Yeah, and it's great. And you like, I feel like every couple of weeks when we open up Fade In, it's like there's a new update, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
They haven't gone, hey, now it's time to buy Fade In 2, or you won't get loads of things. Now it's time to buy Fade In 3, which have been some of the complaints about Final Draft. Final Draft is what we started writing on.
Yeah.
There is this feeling that it is the industry standard, and you get people who are like hard, and there are these people that writing software is a source of much contention online because people kind of fall into their kind of tribes, because they think that because they write in this, that must be the thing that everyone needs to write in. Final Draft spends a lot of money marketing. They sponsor, writing contests and things like that, and that's where they're spending their money to get people to do it. I will say that when we had to deliver our script of The Princess and it was going to go through rewrites by another writer, they wanted it in a Final Draft folder. Guess what Fade In can do? It can export to Final Draft. And that's what we did. It can also import into Final Draft. So anyway.
And there's tons of software out there that can do the same thing.
Yes.
I think the thing that I like about Fade In versus our use of Final Draft, the reason we stopped using Final Draft was because it kept crashing on us. And we would lose hours of work. It would drive us insane to finally we were like, we're done.
And had it happened once or twice, would have been like, oh yeah, okay, whatever. It was happening a lot.
And I'm sure they fixed the bugs. I'm sure they fixed the bugs.
And also, it's like $300.
It's expensive.
Again, not
it's
like
really
I can't afford $300. I can afford $300. I just don't want to spend $300 every 2 years because I need the latest updated version of this software. Anyway,
if you get into production drafts, what we did also discover on The Princess through the writer who we became friends with, who was doing work during production, they insisted it be in Final Draft format. Now that's, I think, starting to slowly change.
I think it is, and it was interesting because when we were working on a TV production that didn't go, and our showrunner on it said, what do you guys use? And we said, we use Fade In. Is that okay? And they were like, we can have this be a Fade In show if you want to be, meaning everyone writes in that software.
Everyone will write in that software.
So
and there are some very big screenwriters and showrunners who have started to use Fade In.
Absolutely.
And I think people are realizing that as long as it can do the same task, who cares what you wrote?
I remember Craig Mazin saying, like, people say that Final Draft is the industry standard. No, the industry standard is the PDF.
Right. Which it used to be the two Brads.
You send, you send a PDF of a screenplay. You don't send a final. I had got into this conversation years ago with someone online who was like, well, Final Draft's the industry standard. I'm like, when a producer, you don't send an editable file to a producer.
What you do when you deliver.
But you do when you did. Well, no, you don't when you
deliver. If you're employed, we've had to send Final Draft files of any script that we've worked on where they planned on continuing the process after we were finished.
Right. But here's the thing. When you are asked for the Final Draft file,
you can always export it. Yeah.
No, but it is we've never sent, hey, here's our deadline, here's the final draft
file. No, you don't do that.
Exactly. When you get asked for the final draft file, that's when you've been replaced.
Yeah, basically.
That's when that's happened. You don't deliver. Yeah. You don't deliver as your final thing, the final draft.
You send PDFs to the studio, you send PDFs to the producers, you send PDFs to talent.
So anyway, that's what we use. I hear there's again, they come in price points and complexities. Right. You know, John August's company makes what's the name of his software? What's it called? It's called, I've got it here. Highland. Yes, Highland 2. Highland is what it is. Yes, and that's really simple. Like the way you construct then that is it doesn't have any formatting stuff that you have to learn what the buttons are.
It actually doesn't have enough for me. I actually
for some people it doesn't. Yeah, but it's once you learn a very simple way of writing it, it knows certain things. You know, it knows that when you put something in parentheses, it's going to be the parentheses off. You know, underneath a character name. Like it gets all that stuff. Right. No, it doesn't quite have enough for me.
What if you want to put parentheses in your action?
I only think it's a problem if it when you write a name in all write something in all caps, it knows that's a character name. When you put it in
the parentheses,
exactly. Underneath that, it knows it's dialogue. You know. So it's and I played around with it a little bit. It wasn't for me, but people really like it.
Yeah, we use Faded. That's the answer.
There's a bunch of stuff out there, but ultimately it doesn't. It's Scrivener. What works for you is great. If it works for you, great. But know that ultimately there are formatting things that are in screenplays. 12-point cure. You can find all those other things online. You know,
it's exactly. Those are the basics. And I will say though, for anyone who does want to be a screenwriter that isn't writing right now, getting a software, even using one of the far less expensive ones that actually does automatically format your work into screenplay format, that's important. It just makes it look like a script. And that's really what's important about it. It's not anything else.
Yeah. And you don't have to spend time doing all of it. You know, can you write a screenplay in Word or Pages? Yes, you can. But you'd have to go and format the tabs so they're at the right place and that the margins are in the right place. There's a bunch of rules, and unfortunately, this is probably areas where there are rules.
There are because and it's because of ease of reading. And
I don't find Furia that easy to read. There are other easier.
Well, some of it is just old, like that's what a typewriter wrote in. That's what it's supposed to be written in, which is ridiculous. But some people, we've seen scripts where people have different fonts in their scripts.
Absolutely right.
I've seen scripts where all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, TV I don't think is necessarily written like sitcom TV. I don't think is written in screenplay format.
It has this completely own format. Everything and these softwares, if you're choosing to write a half-hour comedy, you can select a template and it will automatically format all of those things for you. That way you don't have to focus on it. You don't want to focus on that.
And it's got little things, and most good screenwriting softwares have when you start to write a name that you've already had, it will autofill it for you, or know that if you're in a two-way dialogue, who's speaking. It has shortcuts for.
It's nice to kind of, when you're reading and when you're reading back your own work, it's nice to look at it as a script. I mean, scripts look a certain way. Dialogue looks a certain way. I mean, look, it feels like a screenplay. Let's just take, part of what we wanted to do today was to actually check in on our stuff as well, which is interesting because this podcast has always been about process. And so while we haven't been writing our podcast spec, which is currently titled Hellfire, but we have been working on two other spec projects right now that we felt we needed to focus on due to various attachments and other things going on in our careers. So what's really interesting is that we're in two different process phases at the moment. We're juggling these two projects, so we actually work on one in the morning and one in the afternoon, and we doesn't really matter how we order things. But the point is that it's different doing rewriting than outlining.
Yeah.
It's like a different skill set. It's a different like mentality. And while the kind of basics, I think, of character and story are there, I will say from a process standpoint, our mornings and afternoons
look different.
I
feel like with outlining, and I would say this based on this morning's session, I feel like I'm more kind of like problem solving and like story developing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like you're getting into the real, like, what is this movie? What are the scenes going to be in this movie? Mm-hmm. Whereas I feel like when we're rewriting, I mean, are there going to be new scenes? There are going to be new scenes, but we know what those scenes are going to be. It's more getting into, how does this scene work? What does this character want? How does this character get their objective? What's blocking them? You get into it's more minutiae work.
Sure. It also depends, doesn't it, on the level of the rewrite and how big it would be.
Absolutely.
I mean, what's interesting about, just as we're talking about this, with the rewrite that we approached, that we're approaching right now, that we're actively working on, we actually didn't start by saying, these are the things we're going to change throughout the entire movie.
Sure.
We went through the script broadly. Mm-hmm. We said, here's the main conceptual change that's going to influence this rewrite. Mm-hmm. And there were some minor structural changes that we talked through, but they tended to be at the beginning. So you could have just said that was just the initial conversation as going into the rewrite. But we didn't outline our changes. Like a lot of times when you would go into doing a rewrite, let's say on a job, you're going to get notes back from a studio, and then you're going to approach those notes in the rewrite, and you'll most likely deliver, or at least have a conversation whereby you'll go through each of those notes and say, this is what I plan to do. On a rewrite for your own project, you don't have those same notes coming back to you. And yet, I think that there's sometimes a tendency, if you're doing a rewrite as a polishing, like, I want to go through and I want to trim stuff, or I want to focus on this one character, or I have this singular objective or whatever, it's very easy to kind of just jump in and go. What I'm finding about our rewrite is actually we're having to break story as we're moving through the script, far more than I even anticipated. I thought this rewrite was actually going to be quite quick.
Yeah. Well, it's because part of the, well, we're not going to go into the details of it. Part of the thing that we're doing is we are doing a kind of lore change on the main character and the background, and actually the kind of tonal world of this movie, while structurally it will remain very close. Character we're looking at, their background, who and what they are is different, and yet
although the arc is very similar.
The
thematic ideas are very similar.
But again, we're going, actually,
the villain plot is very similar.
For example, it's not this, but like in draft 1, your main character was a vampire, and in draft 2, your main character is a werewolf. Well, what would that mean for the background and history of that character? Well, in version 1, they've been alive for 900 years, and in version 2, they haven't. What does that mean for their character? It's like little things like that, little things.
I think it's interesting. Like when we're actively outlining the one script, we're going off of we're going through scene by scene, and we will spend an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours talking through one idea to really get to the bottom of what that idea is and why we're choosing it. And today we didn't even move forward in the outline at all. We spent 3 hours this morning talking through one big idea. It was a macro idea, but it needed to be solved to move forward, and that was part of our process. And yet when we're doing the rewrite, even though the rewrite also involves big macro changes, because there is so much that is the same.
Mhm.
It's almost as if we're going through that, just going, well, when we get to it, we get to it.
Mhm.
Oh, if this doesn't work when we get there, well, we'll figure out when we get there.
Right.
And it's an interesting observation that I'm thinking about right now, going, I wonder why we choose on that draft to not go, hey, let's crack all the lore stuff. Let's fix all of those other things.
Yes.
And come up with all of those answers.
Mhm.
And then go into the script, versus in the outline, we're going, oh no, we need to come up with all the answers first before we even start typing.
Right.
It reminds me of a part of the conversation that we had with, actually, I think with a bunch of our guests who all do various levels of rewriting, or not rewriting, of outlining at different levels of
Sure.
complexity.
Yeah.
But most of them, unless I'm forgetting, so please correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like most of the people we interviewed so far do far less detailed outlines than we do.
Yeah. And again, I think it's because of given the nature of the fact that they are just them. We've only had one, like the way that we work, we need to have a solid way of going, here's what the scene is, because you're going to write draft one of it, and I'm going to write the scene that takes place after. We need to know what's happened from at the end of one scene to the beginning of the next in terms of a lot of stuff, so that when I start writing the scene that takes place immediately after it, it's not in a different time space world with different intentions and different things.
Sure. But it is interesting, isn't it, that in the past, when we would start a new spec, we would write together in the room the whole time. And so those things weren't necessarily they weren't problems.
Right. Yeah.
So the kind of what we're doing on the rewrite was possible because we could go write a scene together and go, hey, you know what? Actually, we can't get to the next scene until we crack this, and then go through and fix that thing, and then go. And what we would ultimately end up doing was, oh shit, you know what? We got to change that thing, and we've even been doing it in this rewrite. We'll go, oh, you know what? We could put this beat earlier, and that would be really cool. Why don't we go back now to scene 2 and put that in? And it's interesting that, like, that's still what Floss and Charlie do. They write together the whole time. And I wonder if you took, and we chose to change to this method because of we wanted to be more efficient.
Yeah, I feel like it improved our output speed. I feel like it did. I do.
And we've written more scripts,
pages per day, than if it were just us.
Yeah.
Just us working on those specific pages together. That's not to say that I'm not closed off to the idea of going back to a way of us just doing it together in the room. Maybe we do get X amount of pages done per day. I just kind of feel like
it's just an observation, because I go, we always still rewrite together.
We do. Yeah.
We don't split up rewrite pages.
For example, I can't imagine a version whereby you would say, hey, I'm going to look at pages 1 through 5 and you do pages 5 through 10. I think that would be really hard on this specific project because of the detail involved.
Right.
And that's not to say though, if it were another version, this is an extreme example of taking one version of a movie and making it another version of this character with a different world and history and stuff. We've needed to do a lot of talking through things, in it to be like, let's get so we know what this is, so we know who they are. We know the lore and the history. We had long conversations about that. I can't imagine doing that with this because it just wouldn't work. But I don't know how it would be in another rewrite. We've never been faced with that position before, so who knows?
Right.
Who knows?
Well,
we're an hour and 5 minutes. We should probably wrap this puppy up.
Yeah.
Put it in a box and send it off on its way.
Where we're at, I think we're as you can tell, we are deep into 2 stories at the moment, so we probably will not be
We're going to
back
be at least
live until
another couple of weeks, I should think.
Yeah, maybe we'll do another check-in next week at the end of the week, and I hope everyone has a wonderful week in the meantime, and get your writing done.
Get your writing done. Write that thing.
Hashtag write your spec. Daniel Conca. All right, guys. Thank you very much.